Welcome to the Veterinary Pulse podcast. My name is Jordan Ben-Shia. I'm the Executive Director of the VIN Foundation. Veterinary Pulse is the heartbeat of the profession. Join us as we talk with veterinary colleagues about critical topics, from student debt to mental health, and share stories. Stories connect us as humans, as animals, as a veterinary community. This podcast is made possible through individual donors like yourself and our technology partnership with VIN, the Veterinary Information Network. Thank you for being here. This episode, VIN Foundation board member Dr. Matt Holland is having a conversation with Dr. Quincy Hawley and Renee Machel about the state of well-being in the veterinary profession. They openly share struggles with mental health and their journey towards happiness. Please check the episode notes for bios, links, and information mentioned. Thank you for listening.
All right, well, welcome Quincy and Renee. Thanks for joining me this morning.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, so I met Quincy a few weeks ago, and which sounds recent, but I only just met Renee a few minutes ago. So would you share your stories with me? Where were you born and raised, and how you got here today?
Yeah, Renee, you want to start?
Sure. So I grew up in Detroit Metro, Michigan, and my first practice was in Romulus, Michigan. I was there for 11 years at my first practice, raised in the field. I started out in kennels and I moved to the different areas of the hospital up to a leadership role within the clinic. And then I moved to North Carolina in 2011 and was at a few different practices here in North Carolina. My last practice, I met Dr. Quincy Hawley. And early on in my career, I struggled greatly with my well-being. And I had a number of different diagnoses that, like anxiety and depression and insomnia, chronic back pain, that really, as an early 20-year-old going through college and new into their career, I felt like I didn't, why am I facing this? And so I didn't want my life to be like that. And I wasn't 100% sure what I was looking for, but I knew that what I had at the moment wasn't it. And so the closest thing I could, put my finger on was happiness. And so I went out on a journey really by myself. This is fairly early in 2000s when the internet was, becoming more accessible. And I educated myself in a lot of different areas of life and really made some big shifts to my mindset and my habits and overall to my life, in which case, brought me off of the medications, got me to a place where I was really thriving. So, when I met Dr. Hawley, we had started to share our stories with each other. And at that time, we were both in a really great place in our lives where we were stable and we were thriving. And when other people would ask us about our stories, we both recognized that it wasn't, just us individually, but instead it was a part of the collective, industry. A lot of people in different places were experiencing the same types of things that we had experienced. And so we decided that we are going to start helping people. And it originally began with the idea of a book, but it very quickly morphed into a company, and we became certified coaches and speakers, and I'm a certified yoga instructor. And we began to create programs to where we structured a lot of the things that worked for us and our clients in a way that other people could replicate so that they could transform their own lives and their own well-being and their own careers. And then here we are today.
Yeah. So Quincy, just describe to us how you started and how your path eventually crossed with Renee.
Absolutely. So born and raised in a small town called Oxford, North Carolina. And from there, my dad and brother, when I was born, I had 20 beagles. So they were big rabbit hunters. And we lived out in the country. So I always see deer and rabbits and squirrels and basically any animal in North Carolina I probably came across at some point within our own yard and things of that nature. So from there, I went on to North Carolina A&T Aggie Pride, and I did animal science. And as an animal science major and student, the chairman of animal sciences, he asked me if I'd ever thought about going to veterinary school. And I was like, that thought has never crossed my mind. I don't even know how to get to veterinary school. But from there, I really started doing internships with the USDA and Elanco Animal Health and with a small animal hospital. And from there, really just fell in love with veterinary medicine. And I knew that's what I wanted to do from that point. And kind of fast forward a little bit, went through veterinary school, graduated, went to a small animal hospital, small animal practice where, is my first real job as a veterinary student. And I did get burnt out there. Didn't even know it was really burnout at the time. I was just experiencing some difficulties and some challenges. And I didn't have any healthy ways of coping with the stress and the sort of overwhelm. And even though I was performing and producing as a veterinarian, I was struggling internally mostly. So people didn't really know that I was having the hard time that I was having both personally and professionally. And maybe we'll get into some details of that a bit later in this episode. But I eventually overcame that struggle, and now I've just found myself living what I consider to be a life of, and it sounds, every time I say it, I'm like, gosh, man, you're so corny. It's all unicorns and rainbows, but literally a life of heaven on earth. Like I truly enjoy being on this life journey. I enjoy my life as a veterinary professional. I have in my opinion, just the perfect setup, and I have challenges and struggles daily. I fail a lot, I mess up a lot, but that's just a part of the process. And I've learned how to cope with those things in a very healthy way. A part of the way I met Renee, as she mentioned, we worked at the same hospital, my second hospital. She was a technician. I was one of the doctors there. And again, realized we were on very similar paths. And boom, get motivated.
Yeah. So
if I just fast forward just a little bit, boom, get motivated.
I'm curious if you if both of you, if you thought you were just waiting for the right person to meet and then something was going to take off, or if it kind of came out of nowhere, that you were just doing your thing and then the relationship formed and that's how it happened, or a mix of both.
It was, I don't think that we were waiting for each other. I think maybe the universe knew we were waiting for each other, but we were definitely in our own worlds. But it was through our behaviors that set us a little apart and connected us. So I told this story just a couple of days ago. I was reading a book, or Quincy asked me, "Hey, Renee, what book are you reading?" And we got to talking, and we very quickly realized that we were both heavily invested in personal development and in researching all of these different people, from like ancient philosophers to modern day psychologists and the most successful people in the world, really just trying to better ourselves and, how that looks in practice. And we started working out together on our lunch breaks and having these conversations. And it started with a book idea. We were like, oh, we should just write a book about the journey and about almost like a plums, but for well-being. And then we got to talking about it more and more. And we realized that while a book may be in our future, we needed something more. We wanted to deliver more. We wanted to teach more and share more. And so our first venture was speaking. And then our second venture was CE seminars. And so these things, our company really has blossomed so organically through the ideas that we have and the conversations, that we have with people.
And I think a big part of it too is our drive to really help the profession. More importantly than anything, like we both struggled, and my struggle, it was so. Let me go back to my story just a little bit, but since I didn't have any of the healthy coping mechanisms and the tools and the strategies and the tactics and the resources and the principles that I've got now as a veterinary professional and as a human, back then I turned to alcohol. I turned to smoking, and I turned to just eating. And so I gained a lot of weight, maybe about 30 pounds in the first year or so of being a practicing veterinarian. And I would literally leave work. I'd go to the first gas station I'd see on the way home, I'd get an alcoholic beverage, pour it in a cup, and I would drink and drive on the way home. And I would smoke a Black & Mild on the way home. And then when I got home, there was more alcohol there, and I would take a few shots from the trunk of a parked car there before I went in to face my family. And I was effectively ruining my marriage. I was living what I consider a subpar life of mediocrity. It was very, very private, as I mentioned earlier. So my coworkers didn't know. I'm not even sure my wife knew the extent of the pain and hurt that I was just experiencing. And, it wasn't the fault of the hospital I worked at. It wasn't the fault of my boss. It wasn't the fault of my family. It wasn't my fault. It was just, no one was to blame. It was kind of this was kind of the result of a system, and a system that doesn't include the importance of well-being and mental health in its natural progression of these people coming out of high school, going into undergrad as pre-veterinary students and matriculating through a really rigorous curriculum, and then going oftentimes into jobs that are relatively stressful, right? Like you're going to war with no war training and no weapons and no army, essentially. You're just kind of thrown out there in a sense. I know things are starting to change a little bit, and I know we'll get into that, but that pain that I experienced, had suicidal ideation as well. I think, Renee, more importantly, we didn't want other people to have to go through that if they didn't have to go through that. Like, we didn't want to see people struggling because they just didn't know the things that we had learned and found out in books and audio books and YouTube videos and through classes and trainings and, and really investing in our mental health and well-being. And so that was a big part of everything, the drive, the determination. Like, Renee and I literally went door to door to hospitals in North Carolina, and we didn't even know what we were doing. We were just like, let's just do something. Right, Renee?
Right. I think, like I said, when I was struggling, it was in the early 2000s, and I had to go on this very lonely journey, lifting every rock and every pebble. And like Quincy said, or, that, like Dr. Hawley said, that it's not accessible to people. We're in a system. And so we wanted to bring an alternative to people. There is an alternative. We at some point subscribe to the belief that this is just life. This is the way that it is. This is the way that it has to be. You might look to your left or your right and see your neighbor or your peer, whether they're struggling or whether they're not struggling. It just is. But what we're not only just suggesting, but what we're teaching, what we're sharing with people is how to live an alternative life, how to transform your life. For me, I did not want to be on a a handful of medications. I was taking medications, both pharmautically and over the counter, for every symptom that I was having, and counteracting all of the other symptoms that were coming along with the ailments that I was still symptomatic from, as well as the side effects from the meds. So, for me, there was this really pivotal moment that I said, enough is enough. They wanted to add another medication. And I said, enough is enough. This can't be the only way. It can't be the only way. And so when we set out on that journey, we want to bring these things to people's fingertips, because we know as veterinary professionals, whether you're a technician like I am, or whether you're a practicing veterinarian or a vet student, or even a pre-vet student, we know that people are busy and they're more fragmented than ever. And people need simple solutions that they can easily access and incorporate into their lives in a really tangible way. And step by step, they will transform, because that's just the basics of modeling behavior. That's the scientific theory. If you do these certain things, you're bound to get this result. Right. And so that's what we really wanted to create for people, because like Dr. Hawley said, there is an option. You don't have to live in that pain and in that darkness, for the rest of your life. You don't have to feel that. There is an option to recover and to heal and to have these conversations. But for us, when we were going through it, like I said, I was early 2000s. And so people weren't having these conversations. I had them with the closest of people. And even like Dr. Hawley said, people didn't know how bad it really was for me.
Yeah. And you both have each mentioned the system. I'm putting air quotes around that, big ones. I'm curious what changes you would like to see in the system. And that reaches back to pre-vet, and then it also extends to well into people's veterinary careers, and not just doctors, obviously, like anybody in the profession. How would you like to see the system change to better support wellness?
Yeah, so I can touch on that. What I know for sure is that well-being, if you're going to have it, whatever that happens to be, I define well-being as the intentionally created state of being happy, healthy, and prosperous as a result of practicing frequent, deliberate personal development and self-care. I also look at well-being as being a set of skills, tools, strategies, resources, principles, and tactics that allows you to get your way in life, and in our case, veterinary medicine. Because if you have that ability, if you have that skill set to create an ideal, to create something in your mind, well, you're not going to create something with burnout, and you're not going to create something that you hate and that's filled with overwhelm and stress and all these different things, burnout and all its friends. You're not going to create that. You would create something much better. And so I believe that if we're going to, as a community, as the veterinary community, get to a place where people have that set of tools and strategies, it has to be a prioritization. It has to be priority. People have to see the importance. They have to know and understand in their heart of hearts the importance of prioritizing well-being, and that it's not just something really fluffy that only people who like to meditate and do yoga do, or that only people who like to eat salads with grilled chicken and exercise once a day and go for a jog and a walk in the park. Like, no, this is something that people who want to enjoy their lives as humans and as veterinary professionals do for a living. And as it relates to the system, this is going to have to be something that I believe that the individual prioritizes for themselves, but I believe organizations and organizational leaders have a duty and an obligation and a responsibility, both ethically and morally, to provide resources for their teams, and to not think that stress and overwhelm and burnout in veterinary medicine is just the way that it is and that it has to be.
I think with well-being, and I'm going to, go on those tails that Dr. Hawley was saying and kind of work backwards, is that we have to be intentional with it. We have to be intentional with the desire to prioritize it. But more importantly, we have to personalize it. So well-being as an industry or for an individual or for a specific organization isn't a blanket statement. You really have to take the principles and the tools and the strategies and apply them to your life, to your organization. And it has to be consistent and adapting, right? We know that what's going to work in 2020 isn't going to work in 2021, and then moving forward year by year. But even on the smaller scale, what's going to work day to day might not work, week to week. And so we have to be willing to adapt and change, but also keep it really personal. And so we have to be willing to get a little vulnerable, get a little uncomfortable, and put the magnifying glass on ourselves, put the magnifying glass on our organizations with a little introspection and compassion to, really analyze, take some inventory of where are we? Because my motto is start where you are. And so you've got to take stock of where are you and where do you want to go? I think, as a system, one of the disservices that I feel is a challenge to most children and adults is the question of, what do you want to be when you grow up? Right? If we take that one question and we apply it to a 5-year-old or a 5th grader or a teenager, and we say, you get to be one thing for the rest of your life. To me, that was what caused a lot of my misalignment growing up, because I could not decide. And so I felt, really disconnected from even just myself. And so, we have to look at ourselves and our organizations to say, it's not just one thing. We know that. And that's really important. It's not just one thing. It's not just about the money. It's not just about the staff. It's about all of these things. And so to apply that lens with compassion, knowing that, we're not looking to create a lot of criticism. We know that it's going to be uncomfortable, but, it's not that it's to anyone's fault. It's not to say that, if as a practice manager, you reach out to a company like Get MotiVEted, to be a resource for your people, it's not to say that you're doing anything wrong. In fact, it's to say that you're doing something really great. You're investing in yourself and you're investing in the team, but it's to acknowledge the fact that we can't be everything for everyone. We're humans first, and then we are our role, whatever that role may be, second. And so we really have to rehumanize the industry and take a look and say, okay, what's the formula that's causing the burnout? Is it the high number of cases? And as a practice, let's just run with that example hypothetically, that if as a practice, we are seeing a high number of appointments per day, per, team, be it their doctors, their, staff techs, whatever the case is, if that is happening, what can be done to change it? So if we want better answers, we've got to ask better questions.
Yeah.
And so, and then to understand, again, it's not a blanket statement. So what works for Quincy might not work for, Amy, and what works for, right? So we've got to be willing to say, it's all right that if you have 20 staff members, that 20 staff members don't work the same schedule. It's okay that, one staff member works through, 3 11-hour shifts and the other staff member works 4 8-hour shifts, rather than saying, okay, hey guys, 20 people, this is the way that we work, and now create your life around that. Instead, let's look at people as holistic individuals and then adapt around that. Right. I mean, that's been something that's is proven to be becoming more valuable to people, is time rather than money. And so, really just looking at things on those holistic scales, on those individual scales, but you've got to start really gross and then you refine, right? So if you start where you are and you start with the really big picture, and then you can kind of refine down to where you guys say, okay, in November of 2020, then we'll start to look at the individual, schedules. But in January of 2020 or 2021 or whatever the case is, right? You would start with, okay, what's the number of cases? Where are we at with the clinic? And you just kind of start really gross, and then you refine that vision, and then you work with it and you adapt with it and you change with it.
Yeah. Yeah. That a lot of that resonates with me. And, you mentioned like what works for one person might not work for another, and what works for another might not work for the one person. And it reminds me of the VIN Foundation had a vision years ago to provide similar support with vets for vets and support for support. So for veterinary support staff. And then it reminds me of what Quincy said earlier about how, part of the change that he'd like to see is more of this come from leadership, from top down, not bottom up. And it does, I agree with both of you when you say part of it needs to come from a personal level. I recently, very recently last year, went through some mental health challenges and was hospitalized for it. And we got a diagnosis of bipolar 2, and now in a much better place. And I think the biggest thing I learned through it all was that it starts with me. It reminds me of when I went to vet school. It's one thing to want to go to vet school. It's another thing to put in the work. And it's like a diet or an exercise routine or any habit that you want to form. It's one thing to want it, and it's another thing to work toward it. And that I apply the same thing to my own personal well-being. And like we've been saying, it's, the recipe for me. So what I apply to myself might not apply to anybody else.
And that's so powerful, right? Because now that you have this nugget of information, you can advocate for yourself. But it takes a lot of courage to advocate for yourself, right? Like if you're in an environment, if you're in an organization that views that as a problem, that views that as a weakness, or, views that as something that can't be accommodated to, that's a really big issue, right? And so if we as a society can make it completely socially acceptable and protected under employment laws for people to have cigarette breaks, smoke breaks regularly throughout the day, how is it so unfathomable that we can't have breaks for people to get fresh air, to meditate, to work in a room with less blaring lights, to have a different caseload, to accommodate those different needs so that we can be more inclusive? Because with or without a diagnosis, we are individuals that just function differently, and it doesn't devalue and it doesn't change your capabilities or, your competency. In fact, it's just a different, recipe.
Yeah, I both wholeheartedly agree with you, and also have some cynical thoughts about why we can't make those changes to society.
Tell me about that.
Harkening back to my time spent in DC, working on the Hill, knowing what influences legislation, and you're talking about, like smoke breaks. Well, who gets access to the people who make laws? So we don't have to get into that. That could be an entirely.
Yeah. And one other thing that I would throw in there too, when it relates to systemic change, I honestly think that there has to be at some point more transparency and clarity around kind of what Matt said in regards to putting in the work as it relates to well-being, as it relates to being burnout free. the hospital, they can decrease the caseload. They can implement a lot of different measures, but I don't think that alone, and I don't think we're saying that, but I don't think that can really solve the issue. There's so much self-work that has to be done. And if we're not able to go and say, hey, I have this problem as an individual, I have this challenge, not a problem. I have this challenge, this growth opportunity as a veterinary technician or veterinarian, and I'm going to go to work on this thing, just like I would have in veterinary school. One of our student representatives from Purdue, Juliana Fournette, she says that she works as hard on her well-being as she would for an 8 on an exam in veterinary school. And that mentality, that mindset can't be not talked about. And sometimes I believe that maybe we're not sugarcoating what it takes. And I know it's different for everyone, and that for person A, maybe they only need a walk, or for person A, maybe they only need an extra vacation a year. But I think that sometimes the solutions that are very mainstream are very superficial as to what it really takes to solve some of the life and veterinary challenges that you may have as an individual. For me personally, I'm not sure that a gym membership or an extra vacation or sleeping an extra 2 or 3 hours would have really gotten me to where I am today. And oftentimes when we think about those blanket strategies that are out there, it's like take more vacation, work less hours, or do this or that. And those things are all good. I love vacation. I really do. I want to go back to Jamaica again, just live there for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
I really do.
Yeah, it's kind of a watered down approach, right?
It is a watered down approach. I read 60 books in 10 months. And until this day, I have 180 books behind me on my bookshelf. I've got, I believe, over 50 books on my audiobook, on my Amazon Audible phone platform. I've got 20-something books on my Kindle. I go to work for my well-being, and it just makes sense. It's very, very basic to me that the version of Quincy, right? I've got the same sort of overall mental health. I've got the same upbringing. I've got the same challenges. That if there's a version of me who doesn't do any of that, and there's a version of me who does all of that, that the version that does all of that is going to be more effective when times get tough, when COVID comes, when you have got to do 3 or 4 euthanasias, or you have a day where 3 or 4 people call out and you've got to do more work and you end up staying late at the hospital. I've got healthy ways to process that because I went to town, because I've been taking massive action over the past 4 or 5 years. And most of the people who I know are able to handle life's challenges and struggles, who are able to see advantages and disadvantages, who are able to find opportunity in chaos, who are able to get better instead of bitter, who are able to grow through life instead of go through life, they put in a significant amount of work. And so I always challenge people that if you've got a challenge out there, first and foremost, my heart goes out to you because I know how dark and difficult things can be.
Quincy,
What's that?
It's the client with the allergy case who comes and says, I've tried everything. Right? So when we're talking about well-being, if we look at ourselves as the clients who come to us and say, my dog has allergies, I've tried everything. And we say, okay, what did you try? And they said, I gave him steroids last week. It's a lack of effort in some ways. And it's persistence. It's perseverance. It's having the support system. It's doing the work. I call it life work. Like you said, the time that we've invested in our own well-being as well as other people's, it's not going to be solved in a day, but it can be started in a day. and so you've got to have the mindset that it's okay to weave. It's okay to sort of, to fall back to a default, and recognize that you're a human, it's going to happen, but can you get back up and keep going? Can you continue forth to where if today or if this hour you didn't make the best choice, can you make your next choice better? It's well-being is a state that it's a state of mind, it's a state of being, and it largely starts with choices. And so if you can, just keep making different choices that support your well-being, even if you make a choice and, it's very default, maybe you snap at a coworker, or maybe you snapped at a loved one, and then that fueled a fight, and then that fueled a sleepless night, and then that fueled a really bad day at work tomorrow, right? You can, in reflection, recognize that, okay, that's an area where I can't change the past, but can I make a better choice next time?
Yeah, this discussion around work reminds me of a song that was playing last night. I think the line went, "I never minded working hard. It's who I'm working for." And my first thought was, oh, good boss, bad boss, or good company, bad company. But then I thought, well, what if that means working for myself? And, how many of us in the veterinary field give ourselves away to the detriment of our own self-care? We work harder for other people, other animals than we work for ourselves. And is that formula sustainable?
You're right. It's the caregivers. So that's, we know through whether it's caregivers in the veterinary industry, or we work with Dr. Feldman, who comes from the first responders and the industry of, military and police and ambulance, EMTs. We know that through all these other different industries, caregivers absolutely do that, and so what a really sound message is the oxygen mask theory. You can't give what you don't have. And so it's high time that we as veterinary professionals start to prioritize ourselves first, so that we can better serve the animals, so that we can better serve our community and our industry. Because
and I think, go ahead.
Just because without it, we deplete, like you said, Matt, it's a disservice to not only ourselves, but to the people around us.
Yeah. And I think that one thing that we kind of understand at Get MotiVEted, and that a lot of people in the profession understand, especially the thought leaders and the speakers who speak on well-being, the different well-being organizations out there, is how to, it's the multifaceted approach. But I also think that in terms of systemic change, a lot of people still don't even know. Maya Angelou has a quote that says, "Do the best that you can until you know better. And then when you know better, do better." But for me, for example, it was almost by chance that I came across the information, right? It's almost by chance that I came across the well-being information. I had to go to the AVMA's Veterinary Leadership Conference to learn about terms like compassion fatigue and burnout. I found out about it there. I saw that they had the Future Leaders Program where they were talking about, this and that and the other. And it wasn't my hospital organization who brought to me like, "Hey, bro, there's this whole toolbox of information and knowledge that could really help you get your way in life in veterinary medicine." It was almost by chance that I discovered those things. And so a big part of Get MotiVEted's mission is to do whatever it takes to reach everybody, to do whatever it takes to reach the corner of the world, the veterinary hospital that's, out in the middle of nowhere, to make sure that they've got the opportunity to learn about this stuff. And while they're, slaving away, trying to help every animal and client that they can. And so oftentimes it's not that people are choosing to choosing lack of effort, or choosing, to choosing poor well-being or pseudo well-being or whatever it happens to be. It's just that the information isn't out there, that this is the base, this is the foundation of what it takes to get yourself from point A, which may be struggle, to point B. And so, for example, before this podcast recording, I was on the phone calling hospitals. It's not the most fun work. It may not be the most effective way of reaching a large amount of people, but we mean business, and we mean business, and we will do whatever it takes to reach those people so that they can hear the stories, so that they can get access to the information that may be life-changing for them.
Yeah, you mentioned that you stumbled upon some potentially life-changing information by chance. I kind of feel the same way for me. I found the most help through a woman named Dr. Machel and she's with the Vets for Vets that I mentioned earlier, and she also happens to be Chicago-based. So when I was struggling and not finding improvement through the means that I had been, told would help, she took the time and energy to really understand what I was going through and really look for trained professionals who could work with me and help me. And I can't imagine many other scenarios where I feel like I would have stumbled on that information. And yeah, sometimes it takes a little bit of luck too, I suppose.
Yeah. I'm so happy to hear that you were able to connect with someone. I think there's, whether you had the intention to meet with her or whether I think seek and you shall find, right? So if you had just even the slightest inclination that this isn't working and I need to find something else, I think that's important, right? Rather than just accepting, like I said earlier, this is just how it is and I'm just going to live my life like this, and who knows, maybe it's going to be a really short life. It sounds like we've all had some pretty dark days, but just that tiniest inclination that says, I need to find something else. This isn't working, right? And to go about it in the right way and to just keep lifting those rocks.
Yeah. And I heard you just say, what we need to do in order to move forward just a little bit. And then I heard Quincy say earlier, when I asked about, what needs to change in the system, he said, maybe a little bit has changed, but there's more to go. And maybe this is just a different way of asking the same question. What is the profession doing well, and what can or should it do better?
I think having these conversations is a fantastic start. So, we know that there's the Wellbeing Summit, right? We know that there are companies and, organizations that are not just having the conversation and bringing together these people and highlighting them, right? Like Dr. Gaspar, the more individuals that we have. And so that's where it's this merging approach through individuals and through leadership that will eventually revolutionize things for the people. It's a merging approach to where, if you think of it almost like, this is going to be fun, you guys. Have you guys watched X-Men where there's Cerebro? And he puts on, you haven't seen X-Men?
No.
Stop it. Oh my gosh.
No.
Okay.
Oh my gosh.
Okay. So the movie X-Men, Xavier is, he's telepathic, I believe. And so he puts on this machine and he's able to connect with all of the mutants on the globe. And all of these little lights light up in this almost like an auditorium. And, you think about it like that, right? So there's all these little tiny individuals that if we begin to highlight and shed light on, they bring the light and the darkness kind of fades. And so you have the individuals and you have the leaders and it all merges together. And so I think that, the veterinary industry is doing the conversations. We're having these conversations like this podcast right here, creating the budget lines to where, people are willing to invest in it, bringing people together, opening it up to not just veterinarians, whether it's statistics, research studies, or whether it's just the availability for a technician or a veterinary assistant, someone who's non-licensed, a kennel, staff member, a receptionist, a boarding staff member, is able to access the same types of tools and services that the veterinarians get to access. So, and those things are starting to happen. It's a big ship to turn. So I think that, those things are really great to get that moving in the right direction. And just blending a lot of the resources that are out there. Quincy and I, with Get MotiVEted, we work on a collaborative plane. In the space of well-being, we don't operate from a place of, competitiveness. We believe that the mission is to minimize, if not eliminate, poor well-being. And so by doing that, it's going to take as many possible people. And so to us, it's more of a movement, and if you can join, whether it's join the Get MotiVEted movement or join the well-being movement, eventually magic will happen and it will take on this life of its own. And it will become easier and easier for people to begin to infuse their practices, infuse their universities with curriculum and just spaced out time, or, whatever works for that organization, that would make it just a little bit better, right? We're not asking for things to do a 360 overnight, but we're just saying, can we get 10% happier? Can we get, X degrees better? And, there's a Zen proverb. I think Quincy kind of alluded to another thing earlier. It's just, you chop wood, you carry water. You reach enlightenment, you chop wood, you carry water. So even when things are good, just like the dogs, if you get better, it's because they're taking the meds. Keep taking the meds. Don't stop taking, don't stop the therapy because you're better, right? So if you've reached a state of well-being, keep going and keep sharing and keep having these conversations. The cog, we don't want that cog to get rusted and, kind of halt up, right? We want to see it continuing to move forward and become even more lubricated.
Yeah, so I agree completely. I'm just going to go back to the very first part of your answer, the X-Men part, because it reminded me of, well, I mean, I already took it to politics once. So once you break the seal, I'll do it again. It reminds me of the Amanda Gorman poem from last week, where she says at the very end, "For there is always light if we're only brave enough to see it, if we're only brave enough to be it." And I cheated and pulled that up during the recording. I didn't have that memorized, but I think that's right. Like if we can be our own light, then it'll be a lot easier for the profession to light up too.
Yeah, and I think that as Renee alluded to, that a lot is being done in terms of well-being and mental health in the veterinary community. I know a lot of the AAVMC, they've got basically mental health professionals in all the different veterinary schools. I think that's just absolutely fantastic. And I know that, AVMA is doing stuff and Zoetis is doing a lot of stuff and VIN is obviously doing a lot of stuff. And there are a lot of different people popping up. And so I believe that just through time alone, we will eventually get to where we need to be if we just stay the course. But in terms of the speed by which that will happen, the amount of struggle and stress and burnout and maybe even lives lost, in terms of those numbers of people who suffer over the next, whatever the time frame happens to be until we kind of get it together, that we just have to remember a few things that, effort is grossly underrated. I think that comes from Gary Vee, and that it's not going to be easy. There are going to be a lot of challenges along the way. And just to remember that better days are ahead, and for us to really start to empower each other, that we can have the lives that we want for ourselves, both as veterinary professionals and as humans first, and then veterinary professionals second. But I really do believe, and I'll kind of go back to this one more time, that I think we're going to have to change sort of the definitions of well-being and what they are, in order for people to really take to them on a mass scale, which is what we really need for people to be happy. I still think there's a huge stigma as it relates to well-being, as being something that, that people need to do, who just want to be more zen or something like that, right? And that mental health is for crazy people. That stigma is still out there. And especially for a lot of the leaders of the hospitals, where they see this as we've already got something for that. We've already got an EAP, or we've got health insurance. And there's the lack of knowledge of what well-being really is. And to me, again, it's the ability to just get your way in life, and in veterinary medicine is the ability, the set of skills to create the exact life that you want for yourself. And I think that when people really get that on a mass scale, that there will be more desire to want to go towards well-being, because they'll realize it's for people who want a six-pack. It's not just for people who want to lose weight and who want to learn how to meditate and do yoga, because not everybody wants to do those things. But as it stands, a lot of the programs that we see in the veterinary schools, I speak a lot at the veterinary schools, right? And so oftentimes they'll have a wellness program, a well-being program, whatever happens to be. And it is highly, 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 highly like physical well-being based. And that is going to miss the people who have no desire to jog or do crunches or anything else, or do some of those other things. It's going to completely miss those people. And so I think there needs to be a little bit of reform there in terms of like, what is well-being, and how can each person use that? How is it beneficial to the average Joe who has a pretty good life? Like, I'm not suicidal. I'm not drinking and driving. I'm not smoking. I'm not going home and yelling at my kids every single day. What well-being is still so vitally beneficial even to that individual. And we have to put it out there in that way.
When we spoke a few weeks ago for the first time, Quincy, I think we talked about how everybody should have a doctor, everybody should have a dentist, everybody should have a therapist, like remove the stigma. It's not a problem to have a therapist. In some regards, I think it's a problem to not have a therapist.
Yeah. I was watching, athlete. That's the thing, is athletes, and we'll say, what America views as successful people, they have coaches. The coaches have coaches. Yeah. High performers have coaches. How is it that in our industry, coaches are not a thing? How is it in our industry, that stigma around therapy is still there? And so that's where I think that the conversations do help, right? Because it does break down the barriers and it does connect people. But it needs to be more, because there is still a stigma around mental health and well-being and therapy, and the, approaches that get you to a place of recovery or being well. And, like Dr. Hawley said, the leaders in the organizations, like the hospital settings, or, is there time? They have a mindset of, well, if anyone had time for that, right? Or we have a health insurance plan. And so their mindset is that it's something that it's not, that well-being is something that is, is your cholesterol low. But, we know that that's the sense of well-being is not that. And so we as veterinary professionals have quality of life discussions with our patients day in and day out. And we don't just talk about their kidney values. We talk about how, do they feel confident walking around the house as a geriatric patient, or are they, fearful? Do they live in fear? And so we look at a holistic view when we're speaking of the patients. Why can't we turn that same view onto us? Recognize that the quality of our lives do matter, the quality of our minds matter, and the quality of our experiences matter. And those things all go hand in hand. And the ability to improve our quality of mind, our quality of experience, and our quality of life is available to us through certain tools and strategies, right? And if we can make all of these things interconnected, like the conversations and the budget line and the time and just the simple, acceptance of it, just the simple ability to say, sure, that'll work. Do we want to bring that in? Do we want to embrace that? Is it something that maybe I won't use, but my staff will? Is it just all of the different things that would have to, it's like a puzzle piece, it's a big puzzle, and you've got to put all of these little pieces in it to make well-being happen.
Yeah. It reminds me of kind of something you both were saying in some of your recent answers. Quincy was talking about how if, like if we stay the course, then I think we're in good shape. But Renee, what you were just talking about, like continuing to put in the work, like that is also a part of staying the course, is actively paying attention to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just
right. Like I no longer struggle with anxiety and depression, but I know darn well that I am, we'll say, sort of, I don't know if it's predisposed, or I'm more apt to get, they knock on my door. Susceptible. Yeah. I'm more susceptible to them being a bigger part of my life than what, say, my fiance is, right? He's an entrepreneur and he goes through many of the things that I go through, but he doesn't, he doesn't have the same type of anxiety knocking on his door every day. And so the well-being work that I have to do versus the well-being work that he has to do looks really different. And when I talked to, we talked to a chief of staff who at the practice that I was at, and she said, wait, you were on anxiety medicine, or, you struggled with anxiety? And I said, absolutely. Right. Or even, because there's such a transformation. And so to talk about it, just talking about it, she's like, wait, so there's an option to be less anxious, and so then through, even I think she was in her 50s, she was like, oh, I can do these different things, and I can create the space in my life for a different type of work. I can create the space in my life for a different type of relationship. I can create the space in my life to change my financial picture. I can create the space in my life to visit Disney more because I freaking love Disney, and so those things are available, but, that's how people connect. Right. And that's how people reduce the stigma, is that there are different ways, and there are people still in the roles that you're in, even with those struggles. Right. So, Quincy and I talk about all the time that through this podcast, someone out there listening might resonate with Matt and his story. And there's just something about him that they say, oh, well, maybe I can be a veterinary professional, or maybe I can be a board member to a company, even though I experience this. Right. And so I think that there's something really powerful in knowing that it's possible to do something different. And that, when we look back at the systems, me just being a tech, right? I could just think of little old me. I'm just a tech from, Michigan, but Wayne Dyer was from Michigan, and, in the well-being space, Wayne Dyer is, he was a psychologist for many years, and then he began to become an author. And he's almost like a godfather when it comes to the space of well-being and some of the, so just to take, like Dr. Hawley said, to take ourselves out of the victim mode, to really empower ourselves, to empower each other, right? It takes a lot to believe in yourself, but if we can believe in each other, sometimes that's a little bit easier. And sometimes that's a little bit more available. And so if we can believe in each other, and if we can root for each other, that just might get you off the ground and, get you sailing where you need to go. And then your self-belief kicks in. Dr. Hawley has a fantastic way of elevating people. And, when we look at what bonds people, when you go into a practice, it's very common that people are sharing stories over the weekend, but oftentimes there's studies. We have, 50,000 thoughts a day, and 50% of those thoughts are negative. 80% of those thoughts are repetitive. And so our self-talk is not serving us. And therefore, the conversations we're having at home or in the practice, you're kind of bonding over negativity, right? You kind of one up, oh, wait until you hear about this client that I had, or wait until you hear about what my husband did. But what if we flip the script, really simply saying, what are you grateful for? What was the highlight of your weekend? What was what has your partner done for you that really took something off of your plate? What has your team member done for you that's taken something off of your plate and made your day easier? Can we bring gratitude into these things, these kind of conversations?
That reminds me of something we did around my dinner table growing up. We would share a favorite part of the day. And growing up, I didn't think much of it. It actually was kind of annoying when we had to do it, because I didn't always have something that came readily to mind. But now I'm grateful for that practice, because I think it was training my little brain to get in that mindset. So, well, then that's how we'll end the show today. What are you grateful for as this new year begins?
I'm really grateful for the connections that we've made along the way. That's something, when we set out, I think it's a really happy byproduct of, when we began speaking, that was sometimes terrifying, but something that always helped ground me was just, it's a conversation. And if I can just help one person or inspire one person. But we really have made such fantastic connections. And I really appreciate meeting people like you and Jordan and bringing this information to people's fingertips. And that's something, that I'm very grateful for.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'll leave you all with this. So one of my favorite books of all time is The Science of Being Great by Wallace Wattles. Read that one over 100 times. And there's a principle at the very end from Ralph Waldo Emerson. And he says that, Wallace says that the world is perfect, but it's not yet complete. And so I've extrapolated that out, and I say that the veterinary profession is perfect the way it is. It's just not yet complete. And that there is a grand, completed masterpiece that is in our future. and he compares it to, you can go from the egg to the worm, from the worm to the fly. And I still believe that we're in the early phases of veterinary medicine. It's really not that old. And it's already awesome. And it has so many awesome parts. And so I'm grateful for those, even in the egg form. But once we hatch out of that, and we go through the cocoon or the worm or the caterpillar phase, however you want to look at it. Once we get to the butterfly phase or the completed form of the veterinary profession, that's what I'm grateful for. I'm grateful for the masterpiece that is yet to come. And I know that it's coming, be it in 10 years or 100 years. And I'm just so grateful for that moment, and for the people who will get to experience the veterinary profession that we're fighting for right here, right now in 2021, right here on this podcast with Matt and Renee and myself. Maybe someone in 100 years is like, dang, man, they were spot on. So I'm grateful for that.
Okay, well, if you're not optimistic after hearing that, then I'm not sure what could do that for you. So thank you, Quincy. Thank you, Renee, for joining us, and hope to talk to you soon.
Thanks for having us, Matt. And I appreciate you sharing your story with us.
All right.
Thanks. It's been awesome. It's been awesome.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Veterinary Pulse. Please check the episode notes for additional information referenced in the podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, please follow, subscribe, and share a review. We welcome feedback and hope you will tune in again. You can find out more about the VIN Foundation through our website, vinfoundation.org, and our social media channels. Thank you for being here. Be well.